Good evening. I'm going to get started. It's just 6:30, and I'll be respectful of your time and hopefully have you out here in a timely fashion. But thank you for coming out. My name is John Serafine. I'm the Director of Counseling here at Quaid. And usually when you put the words financial aid together, people tend to show up and have a little bit of interest in that. So thank you for coming. This comes on the heels of our senior parent night, which we presented a couple of weeks ago. And at that, I talked briefly about financial aid with the promise of, hang on, there'll be someone who knows a little bit more about it they'll be presenting to you than I do, and that's sort of the purpose of tonight. Before I introduce Sam, let me just give you a little bit of information about financial aid, just from where I come from and from where our department comes from. First of all, I tell our counselors that we are not going to be financial planners. I mean, we are not going to do that. I can barely balance my checkbook. I'm the last person you want to give financial aid advice. But we're all very, very well versed in the financial aid process and the process and the forms and how to navigate through that system. But what I won't do, and what none of us will do, is play the role of financial planner. So oftentimes I'll get calls from people saying, hey, what do I do with this account and my 529 and this to make my expected family contribution smaller? And we're just not going to. That's not who we are. So I'm sure if you have an accountant or a financial planner, you can go that route. But I just want to let you know I made it really clear to our counselors that we're not going to engage in those conversations. A couple other things about financial aid that I would just want to throw out there is, oftentimes we hear that people say to me, well, I talked to my neighbor or my coworker or my brother or sister, and they filed for financial aid. They didn't get anything, so therefore we're not going to file either. And I think that's a pretty dangerous approach to take. I mean, everyone's financial circumstances are different, and I really think you have to let the process play out. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is not listen to the other people who came before you who maybe didn't get as much money as they had liked or whatever, right? So that would be another thing I'd ask you to at least be mindful of. The other thing is, in this system, it's a pretty unforgiving system if you're not prompt. So there are some really set, defined deadlines in the financial aid world, and it really behooves you to pay attention to them. And people who are late to the game typically don't tend to have a lot of good luck in the financial aid system. So I would ask you to pay careful attention to that. And then the other thing I would ask you is this: I have 4 grown children who all went through college, so I've gone through, filled out 16 Fafsas over the years and watched this process unfold. And I do think it's a very fair system. But I think it's a system you really have to let unfold. You have to let it play out. You have to go through the steps and let it happen. I think a lot of people want to take shortcuts, or like I said, a lot of people have some misinformation about how financial aid works or doesn't work, and then they kind of get jammed up, right? So again, I'm going to do Samantha Veeder. Sam is the Associate Dean of College Enrollment and the Director of Financial Aid at the University of Rochester, used to be at Nazareth, who has a wealth of experience. I've heard her presentation before. She takes a really complicated topic and makes it very practical and pragmatic. And I think you'll find it very helpful. I will tell you this after her presentation, if you get home and you have questions that you want to follow up on, please don't hesitate to call me. If it's something that I can't address, one of the beauties of being in Rochester is that we have numerous colleges around here, and the financial aid offices tend to be more than willing to assist, even if your son's not going to that specific school. So again, I certainly would encourage you, if you need some clarification, to reach out to me. And again, if it's something I can't address or don't feel it's appropriate for me to address, I'll certainly put you in touch with someone who can address it. Okay? So they're all yours. Does everyone have a handout when you walked in? If not, raise your hand. I'll get you one.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Sam Veeder, and I am currently at the University of Rochester. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have put my 2 kids through college. I now have a physical therapist and a pharmacist, so I feel I'm pretty set for, as I approach retirement, I've got my aches and pains and drug needs all taken care of. But I, too, have filed, I think they're both in 6-year programs, so I have filed 12 Fafsas as well. So I have experience from this on both ends. I spent 10 years at Hobart Wayne Smith, and then some time consulting, some time at Nazareth, Syracuse, and now here I am right down the street at the University of Rochester. I am not going to talk specifically about U of R tonight. Although certainly if you have questions about U of R, I'd be glad to answer them for you. I may use them in an example sometimes just to make the information we're going to discuss more clear. But tonight's presentation is going to be applicable no matter where your son is looking to attend, whether it's a community college or an Ivy League school. And I gave you all handouts because I have been doing this for a while, so I guess I'm a little old school, but also because there's some key information that I want to make sure you remember and have with you after you leave tonight. And at the risk of sounding, you know, like the teacher from the Peanuts cartoons and just kind of womp for the next hour, I'll try to point out the things that you should know and remember that's most important. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about forms. Forms are boring. We got to get through them. You've got to file them and we have to review them. So we'll get through how to do that. And then we're going to get to the fun stuff. And my presentation is a little different than many of my peers. I am going to walk through the actual top secret formula a little bit. So it's like the KFC chicken recipe, right? So those friends of yours that did not give up their Wednesday night to be here with us, you don't have to share with them the KFC chicken recipe because they didn't give up their time. But I think the way that I'm going to break it down for you tonight, you should be able to walk away kind of having an idea of where you might fall in the process as far as eligibility goes. So let's get started. So first and foremost, how many of you are here because your son is a senior? Any juniors? Or younger? No, okay. So you are already kind of starting that process. You've probably done your visits. Applications may even be started as well or starting shortly. But at this stage, the most important thing for you to do is keep your options open. Your son has been preparing academically for a long time, but we have to prepare financially as well. And even if you haven't saved a penny for college, it's never too late to start. And as we'll see in a minute, the formula won't penalize you for not having saved. You are a consumer, and you need to think of yourselves that way. So as you do your visits, I think the most important thing is fit, and that you actually do a college visit. Get on campus and feel if it's the right place for your son to continue their education. Most of the time you know. My son woke up, fell asleep in the car on the way to a school that was way out in the country and probably 3 hours away in the middle of winter. Woke up as we're driving through snow-covered cornfields, said, "Are we there yet?" I said, "No." He said, "You might as well go home. I'm not coming." And we weren't even on campus yet. And then we had a horrible visit and he did not go there. But I'm a consumer too, right? So you're doing the return on investment on everything you buy. And you need to do the return on this investment too. This is the best investment you can make for your child. There's nothing that you can get a return like you can with an education. But you need to understand what the outcomes are compared to what you're expecting. So if grad school, law school, med school is the outcome, then what are those placement rates? If job and career is the outcome, then what are those placement rates? And does the school have the program that your child is looking for? So we're going to go through some basic principles of what is called needs analysis. Needs analysis is the formula that determines eligibility for financial aid. And these basic principles are the same no matter where you're applying to go to school. First and foremost is that to the extent that parents are able to do so, you have primary responsibility to pay for your child's education. It's not the federal government's responsibility. It's not New York State's responsibility. And it's not the college's responsibility. Those resources kick in to supplement what the parents can reasonably afford to pay based on their household and financial income for that reporting year. And students also have some skin in the game. We expect them to invest in themselves as well, and typically they do that by taking out a student loan while they're in school and repaying that after college when they're gainfully employed, or a summer job and saving their summer earnings, or a work-study job while they're in school. You will be evaluated in your present financial condition, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And you will be evaluated in an equitable and consistent manner, with an opportunity for any special circumstances to be reviewed if they impact your ability to pay for college. All right, so we have to talk about forms. So we're going to start with the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. Now the good news is, well, I guess this is good and bad, right? The forms are available every year on October 1st. October 1st of the senior year, which means on Saturday, which means the bad news is you can't go home today because you're going to be so excited after this session and do your FAFSA, but you can do it on Saturday because the forms will be opening up then. The free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, collects your household and personal information. I don't really think anybody uses paper anymore, so you're going to want to go to fafsa.gov and complete the form electronically. Now what you can do today is get your federal student aid ID, or FSA ID. And I'm going to tell you that that is probably the most difficult part of this entire process, is getting that FSA ID. And for me, in my job, maintaining my password to my FSA ID is one of the most difficult things. It's like a fortress to get in. Now parents, if you have an FSA ID already for an older child or a FAFSA that you did for yourself, it's the same. You will use that again, keep that handy. But the student needs their own individual and unique ID because it's their unique signature on all federal financial aid forms. So in addition to the FAFSA and the renewal FAFSA every year, you'll use the FSA ID to sign any parent and student loan applications if you decide to take a loan. So once you get that FSA ID, keep a recording of it in a secure place. Also, there is a worksheet on that website that you could print out and kind of work on your FAFSA before you actually get online to enter it in. And again, this collects the demographic and financial information for your household, and I think John mentioned this earlier, that information is used to calculate the expected family contribution, and then we at the college use that EFC to calculate financial aid eligibility and prepare a financial aid award. This form is available in English and Spanish. So, John mentioned this too, if you forget everything I say today, meet the deadlines, meet the deadlines, meet the deadlines. The form opens up on October 1st, but the deadline for filing could be different depending on the schools you're looking at. And that's a little bit of homework that you have to do. So go to each college's website, their financial aid page, and find out the deadlines for filing, and then complete all of your required forms by the earliest deadline of all of the schools. And that way you'll know that you have everything in on time. So for this year, October 1, 2022, it's opening up for fall of 2023. Now most schools have around a December 1st deadline, if you're thinking about early decision admission, and around a February 1st deadline if you're thinking about regular decision admissions, just to give you a sense of how long you have. Now when you use the electronic version or FAFSA on the web, the benefits to you are that there are built-in edits and skip logic that prevents you from making very costly errors. So it won't let you skip a question that you have to fill in. It may look at an answer and say, are you sure this is right? And so that you can double check and make sure that it's right. You can also use the IRS data retrieval tool to import your taxes. Now this is a really great feature. I used to stand up here years ago and say, I don't think this will happen in my lifetime. And now it's been happening for several years now, where the Department of Education and the IRS have an agreement where they can't share the data with each other, but the data can come from the IRS and populate your FAFSA automatically. So while you're in the FAFSA section, the income section, you can link out to the IRS, re-authenticate your identity, give permission for the data to fill into your FAFSA, and just like that, the hardest section of the FAFSA form is completed. Otherwise, have a copy of your tax returns handy as you fill out the form. The FAFSA will say the line number on your taxes that is the correct answer. Now for next fall of 2023, you will be filing using what's called prior year income. That means you'll be using the 2021 tax returns that are already on file with the IRS. So you don't even have to estimate. Those tax returns are done, and you can either pull out your copy and fill out the FAFSA, or I highly recommend using the IRS data retrieval tool. This is just a screenshot to give you an idea of what that website looks like so that you know that you're at the right place. Remember, it's a federal government website, so it's a .gov extension. And you can see here that when you're starting a new FAFSA, you'll click the new. But if you're a returning user, you can log in as a returning user. You will just identify whether it's the student logging in or the parent that's logging in to complete the data. I already talked about this IRS data retrieval tool. One of the nice things about this too is about 30% of FAFSA filers get selected for a process called federal verification. If you're one of the unlucky ones that get selected, then the financial aid office has to verify your household and income information that you put on the FAFSA. And to do that, we have to collect additional forms and copies actually of an IRS tax transcript. We can't even use a copy of your 1040. But if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, you will reduce the chances of being selected for verification to probably slim to zero. So you won't have to do that extra work, we won't have to do that extra work, it'll just automatically process for you. Now there are some cases where you can't use the IRS data retrieval tool, it just won't work. If you're filling out the FAFSA and you didn't say that your tax return is complete, then it won't be looking for a completed tax return. If the marriage date is recent, after January 2021, if the first 3 digits of the tax filer are 666, if you filed a non-US tax return, if you're married but you choose to file separately instead of joint, or you're filing as head of household, or if neither married parent entered a valid social security number, or the non-married parent or both parents entered zeros for the SSN. Other than those cases, it should link out, find your tax return, and be able to be used. Really the big one here that catches people is if you're married but filing your tax return separately.
Can I ask for
Yes, sure.
the non-US tax return? Can you just explain that?
Yes, so some families who work outside of the US may have to file a foreign tax return, even though you're a US citizen. And it can't retrieve that one, so you'll have to enter it yourself.
You're saying enter the data, it will enter your US data, but it won't enter the data that you need to input from a foreign tax return.
Exactly. And we already talked about the FSA ID, and so you can go out now on the Department of Education website and obtain those. The biggest FAFSA error that I don't want you to make, unfortunately, this is a form that still uses the Social Security number. The Social Security number is still required. When you file a FAFSA form, you are filing it in the student's name using the student's Social Security number. Parents, please do not use your own Social Security number. Please do not mix up your children's Social Security numbers. Please do not transpose numbers in the Social Security number. This is probably the worst mistake because the Social Security number becomes the federal identifier for the student record forever and ever, all through grad school and all through repayment of any loans. And once that is in, it cannot be changed. If that gets into the federal system and is actually someone else's Social Security number, then you have to start all over and refile again with the correct SSN. So just take a moment and make sure that you're filing correctly under the student's Social Security number. If you have 2 children in college, then you are filing 2 FAFSA forms, one for each child under their separate Social Security numbers. If the student's biological parents are divorced or separated or were never married, then the parental information that's reported on the FAFSA form is for the custodial parent only. And if that custodial parent is remarried, then step-parent information is required by law to be included. It doesn't matter if there's some kind of divorce agreement. The Department of Ed does not recognize that. You still file with the FAFSA form under the custodial parent or the parent that provides more than 50% of the support. So usually it's pretty easy to just tip the scale a little bit, and usually gets tipped by where the student's primary residence is. If it really is a 50-50, then you have to dig a little deeper and see, who provides more support, who provides health insurance, for example. Rule of thumb, I would say, the address that is used on their driver's license, the address that is used when you file a college application is the primary resident. That's the parent who files the FAFSA as the custodial parent. Any questions on that? Yes.
To get back to the prior subject, when you're filling this form out, to push, you said there's access to IRS data that can automatically push to the application.
Yes.
That's an area where the parent has to use their social security number, though, right?
Right. So the form itself, when you start to file, you will list the name and social security number and address of the student.
Okay.
Later on in the form, it will ask for information about the parents, and it'll say mom's social security number. And like first few letters of the last name, date of birth, some identifying information, and it'll say dad's. And depending upon if you're married or single, you would answer those appropriately. So it has the social security number in a different section of the FAFSA to be able to link out to the IRS. Yes?
So I had to fill one out for my daughter last year. Can she see what I put in? Like, can she see all my tax return information?
If she logs in to the FAFSA.gov, yes.
So the kids can see all your personal things?
If they are looking at it, yes. One thing I will say is, now I haven't done this myself in a couple of years and it changed.
I'm not sure they see that because, the information is not coming to you displayed on the screen.
I was just going to say.
It's going to the Department of Education.
It doesn't go to the Department of Education because the agreement doesn't share the data with the department. But when it fills into the FAFSA form, on your end, it's all X'd out. On my end, I see the numbers. So I'm actually, it used to be that the student could see it, but if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, when it pre-fills the application, it X's out. And so they won't see the numbers, and you won't even see the numbers, but it transmits to the school, and the school sees the numbers.
I couldn't get, last time I had to do it by hand.
But if you do it by hand, it won't X out, and they can see the
And
numbers.
I thought,
Yeah.
well, this is kind of odd, because now they,
If she logged in, yeah, or he logged in. Yeah. Any more questions on divorce, separated, never married?
I kind of do.
Yes.
So you said it's the person who is makes more, I'm confused.
It's not the parent who makes more money.
Okay.
The definition is going to change. There's a huge overhaul coming in the 24-25 school year. And some of that is going to change this definition. But for this year when you're filing, it's who provides more than 50% of the support. But the household, housing and food in the household really tips the scale. So
I mean,
even if that,
like 50-50.
where they live,
Food and where they live.
yep, so you're gonna have to, if it's like 3 days, 2 days, 3 days, 2 days,
No, it's literally 50-50.
you'll have to dig a little deeper as to who provides more support to tip that scale. Usually then I would go to like who provides the health insurance.
That would be me. But, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
there's something, the easy way is that housing tips the scale, wherever they primarily live is,
And like I said, that's,
but if that's
okay.
50-50, then you have to figure out like who's providing more of the financial support. If the incomes are even and you're contributing equally
No, that's the
50-50.
thing, the incomes are not even.
So if the contribution there is not even, then it would be the one who's providing more financial support, is the custodial.
Okay.
We can talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to get into some of these others later. The big ones here are social security number and whose information is to be used. Now, in addition to the FAFSA, you may have additional forms. A couple more things about the FAFSA. With the FAFSA form, yes.
So we skipped over the last one, the real estate network. Is that's got to be a lot of complexity around that. Is there guidance?
I'm going to talk more about that. Can you hold that thought and we'll get into formula and talk about the things on the bottom we're going to talk about in the formula itself. And with the FAFSA form, you can list up to 10 schools initially and send it in. It usually takes 24 to 48 hours to process. You'll get an acknowledgement. If your son is looking at more than 10 schools, good grief, that's a lot, but you can just go in and replace those 10 with another 10 and so on and so on. Okay, you can ultimately get it to as many schools as you want. Now, in addition to the FAFSA form, which applies you for federal student aid, some schools like University of Rochester, Ivy League schools, and high-cost private institutions who offer a significant amount of financial aid also use the CSS profile through the College Scholarship Service and the College Board. You know the College Board already from PSATs, SATs, AP classes. And they also have a financial aid component of their services. The profile form is basically the FAFSA on steroids. It's everything you already did for the FAFSA, plus a whole lot more information about your financial situation in order to more equitably determine what you can afford to pay for college. Now, there is a fee for the profile. However, that fee is automatically waived by the College Board for all families making $100,000 or less. And the biggest difference between the FAFSA and the profile is that these schools, because they meet your full financial need, so for example, at Rochester, we're awarding over $150 million a year in grants and scholarships, and we are committed to meeting 100% of the need of every student. But we use the profile to define that need. And if you remember on one of the earlier slides, we said a basic principle of the formula is that all parents are expected to contribute to the extent that you can afford to do so. Well, that FAFSA form only collects the custodial parent information. So this profile form, if you're in those situations, you have to file two. Both the custodial household and the non-custodial household would have to file a CSS profile form. So students whose parents were divorced or separated or never married at a school that requires the profile would need one FAFSA and two profile forms, the profiles from each household. To an earlier question, the data is not shared between the custodial and non-custodial parents. No one can see each other's data. It links up on the back end through the student ID.
Does the profile have IRS retrieval tool as well?
No, and the profile doesn't have the IRS retrieval tool, so you actually have to enter in the data yourself. So have your tax returns ready, or if you manually do the FAFSA first, because like I said, a lot of the questions are the same on the profile. It's just going to ask you a whole lot more to get a better handle on your financial situation.
So this is a completely different form.
Completely different form. Completely different form. So again, you'll need to check at the schools that your son is looking at as to, they will all use the FAFSA, but they may also use the profile. And if it's a school like U of R, if it's a school that costs $80,000 a year, so all the Ivies and the Ivy wannabes, then you will most likely have to do a profile as well. And that is because they offer enough financial aid to meet your need. Versus when I used to work at Nazareth College, Nazareth could not afford to meet all of their financial need. We only used the FAFSA, but we didn't meet need. And schools that don't meet need, that gap gets pushed back on and added to your contribution. Now some schools, instead of using the profile, they have their own institutional aid application. So check on that too. There might be something in addition to the FAFSA that is not the profile, but that the school requires you to do for them directly. And then if you, yes?
What about if you have sole custody? You just need the one parent then?
The parent who has primary custody would do both the FAFSA and the profile. It would likely still be expected, even in sole custody, if the non-custodial parent is alive, and I mean, there's an automatic waiver for deceased or in prison. Other than that, you have to talk to the financial aid office directly about whether you could get a waiver for the non-custodial parent profile based on your situation. Now, because you're New York State residents, if you go to a New York State school, there is a New York State grant program that you would have to do an additional application in order to apply. The FAFSA form begins the grant application in New York State because it automatically picks up that you're a New York resident applying to a New York school. But there's an extra form that you do have to file, the ETA, in order to complete that application. And if your net taxable income, so after deductions, is $80,000 or less, currently the New York State grant program is ranging from $500 a year to $5,665 a year. It does not transfer out of state. So if your son goes to a college outside of New York, then it's not applicable. Yes?
Is that the cap? You're saying the $80,000?
$80,000 right now is the cap on taxable income. So when you file the FAFSA and the profile, you're reporting gross income, right, from your tax return. But for New York State calculations, it's net taxable income that is used to calculate eligibility. So for typically a family of four, a gross income of about $96,000 would equate to an $80,000 net taxable. Okay. Oh, you got through the forms. I told you it was the worst part. Now, yes, any questions? Yes.
The one that you showed, you can do that now, or is there a date when it starts?
So the FAFSA and the profile for fall of 2023 are available on October 1st, which is Saturday. Can't do it until then. And it's always October 1st of the senior year of the student. Yes?
So I really don't want to get too far ahead. I know you haven't gotten to this, but you referenced some massive overhaul. Are there articles or things that we can research? I mean, as we're preparing and thinking about this down the road, or you obviously are patched into that?
Yeah, it's called Fafsa Simplification. And it's going to abbreviate and make the FAFSA form even shorter. It's not going to count the number of kids in college anymore, which is like...
Now that we have 3?
That's a big change. I will tell you that because I just filed my annual federal report today, I'm going to now spend the next 2 months starting to do data analysis on what these changes all mean for eligibility. But again, schools that use the profile like us, we will still count number in college for our money, even though the feds don't. But that's going to cause big discrepancies in the process, as you know it, between... So the FAFSA might say you're not eligible for federal aid, but the school will adjust for 3 in college and say that you are. It's going to be... I've been doing this 30 years. This is probably the biggest thing that has happened in financial aid. And there's probably 2 other things close to it, but this is big. We don't even have a lot of details yet. Because the feds aren't giving us details yet, so.
The Department of, is it, so it's the organization here, the Department of Education?
Department of Education, yeah, and federal student aid. But the key word is FAFSA simplification. And right now, they're so caught up in loan forgiveness that they're not working on FAFSA simplification at the moment. Yes. Holding that thought. Okay. Any other questions before we get to the good stuff? Okay, so now what happens? You filed the forms. Those forms come to the financial aid office based on the school codes you reported on the FAFSA and the profile. We receive those. Plus, we may ask you for some additional documents like tax returns and things to supplement the application. We review all of those, and I'll tell you at Rochester, we read those files just like admissions reads an application. We read those tax returns just like admissions reads a letter of recommendation. We're trained in all that. We collect business tax returns, W-2s, the whole thing. And we read those applications. We determine your family contribution and eligibility for financial aid, prepare that award and send it to the student upon acceptance, and that will list their cost of attendance, which we're going to talk about in a minute, how the need was determined, and then the types and amounts of financial aid that are being offered. Now, you may have some special circumstances that the forms don't take into consideration. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's set in regulation that you file using prior year income. For fall of 2023, it's the 21 tax return. Sophomore year and fall of 24, it's the 22 tax return, and so on. So the income is always lagging a little bit behind. Assets are reported on the day you file, so they're like real time. But something might have changed in the last 2 years in your income that can't be documented through the FAFSA. The profile has a place where you can freeform write, and we also read that. But if that's the case, you have to contact the financial aid office directly about your special circumstance. They'll likely want it in writing with supporting documentation. So if you are saying, I've since lost my job and the income has decreased, and my next year's tax return is going to be lower, we're going to collect an explanation of that and any supporting documentation you have that shows the income level. We will review that and make a determination. Now, what's tricky about special circumstances is it's up to the discretion of the school financial aid office and their policy. So if you're applying to, I'll just pick locally, me, Fisher, Naz, Brockport, and then you contact all 4 of us with a special circumstance, you could get 4 different answers. You could get, we're not doing anything, you file the FAFSA on your 2021 income, and we'll review it next year when we're using 2022. Or you could get, we'll adjust everything for you and update and go ahead and use your 2022 income now, or something in between. It's up to the policy of the school. Examples of special circumstances are change in employment. These are the common ones. If you have unusual and high medical bills that are out of pocket and not covered by insurance, a change in the parent's marital status, unusual dependent care, or if the student had not obtained the parental information of one of the parents. And this is saying the same thing, just much prettier, of what those examples of special circumstances are. So what is financial aid? Financial aid is scholarships, grants, loans, and work study that are used to supplement what the family contribution is to help make college affordable for you. The gift aid, or the free money, is what you want to see a lot of, right? That's the scholarships and grants. Scholarships are based on typically merit, academic achievement, leadership, music, talent. Don't hold your breath on athletics. Division I athletic scholarships are not common. They exist, they're not common. But it's not, scholarships are not based on financial need. Grants, on the other hand, are based on financial need, based on the financial information provided on the forms, and not based on any of those other criteria. The loans and the work study are the self-help forms of aid, or the way the student helps themselves. And you don't have to take these 2 options. But it's likely every financial aid offer will include the student loan, the federal student loan program, and a work study opportunity. Now you can decline them, but the school won't replace those with grant money. Or you could win an outside scholarship at graduation locally and use those and say, we're going to decline the loan this year because we won these scholarships from the high school or the community. So again, the categories are need-based and non-need-based. Need-based based on the financial information, and that non-need-based aid is merit, talent, leadership, denominational, if you're applying to for religious Again, just a prettier way to lay out the difference between the gift aid and the self-help aid. The sources of these funds are the federal government, the state, although again, New York does not transfer out, maybe an employer, maybe you work at the U of R and have a tuition benefit, dependent tuition benefit, or work at another college or university that has a dependent tuition benefit. Private scholarships are sources, but most of the financial aid comes directly from the college and university. The federal programs are the federal Pell Grant program, that's the biggest one. And if you are eligible for the federal Pell Grant, you might be eligible for SEOG, or the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Again, that's up to the college, so it could be different. Pell will be the same everywhere, but SEOG could be different because it depends how much money each school has to offer. There's an Iraq and Afghanistan service grant, a TEACH grant for students who are interested in pursuing teaching, the federal work study program, and then parent and student loans. For the New York State program, there is a residency requirement. New York also does have a merit-based scholarship program in addition to the TAP award. The merit scholarships are determined through the schools to the top 5 and I think 10%, 5 and 10% of the students graduating at the school. But again, most of the awards come from the colleges and universities and can be awarded based on merit or need or both, using the FAFSA and the profile application. Your private sources are going to be local foundations or community organizations, right? The Wegman Scholarship was always a big one. And the employers, if you are working for, particularly if you're working for a college or university, they tend to have tuition benefits. Okay, here is the magic formula. It doesn't look so complicated, does it? The definition of financial need is simply the cost of attendance minus the family contribution equals financial need. And you're like, I've been waiting 45 minutes to hear this secret recipe. It's actually pretty simple. What's important for you to know is that need varies based on cost. So you file these forms and it uses a formula to calculate an expected family contribution. That per child per 1 year. So if you've got 3 in school, then that contribution gets adjusted. It doesn't get multiplied by 3, it gets reduced because it's a per child calculation. But that contribution remains constant no matter where you're applying. So let's say school 1 in red is U of R, and we cost $80,000, and your family contribution is $10,000. Then your financial need, or the X, is going to be $70,000. And we're going to award $70,000 in aid. And then you apply to school 2. Let's say that school 2 is a regional private, right? More like a Nazareth or St. John Fisher. They probably cost now, it's been a while since I worked there, they're probably close to $60,000. You would still have a $10,000 family contribution, and your financial need then would be $50,000. Those types of schools and the SUNY schools, though, typically SUNY schools have a lower sticker price, right? But they don't have grants and scholarships or very limited merit. So the discount is already in the price, and you don't get additional financial aid. So, well, let me finish one thought here before I go on to the next. Let's stick with the regional privates like a Nazareth or Fisher. They can't always meet your need. So if you're eligible for $50,000 at a school like that, but they can only give you $35,000, then that additional $15,000 of that unmet need gets added to your $10,000 contribution. And same thing happens at a SUNY. So say the SUNYs now are, we'll call it 30, right? Because I'll tell you this, room and board is $15,000 no matter where you go. No matter where you go. NYU, MCC, they're $15,000. You still have a family contribution of 10, but the SUNY schools don't have any grant money. So you're going to pay the remaining 20. Okay? Any questions on that? Need varies based on cost.
In every fall, the process per child starts all over again.
Every
Everything has
fall.
to be revised.
Every fall, you do it again, update to the next tax year, any changes in assets, sibling enrollment, or other information, and then everything gets revised, yes.
So our son is the oldest. We have a younger daughter that goes to Mercy. So if I'm hearing correctly, Mercy's expensive, just like McQuaid. That won't be considered out. It
So-
will, or no?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have touched on that here. There's a couple of, in that special circumstances that we talked about,
Yes.
there are a couple of scenarios that you may think are special circumstances, but that the colleges probably won't.
Yeah, she's special, yeah.
One of them, not your daughter, but paying tuition at elementary and secondary schools.
Yeah.
Is not counted. The sibling has to be enrolled at another college or university in an undergraduate program in order for that adjustment to happen. Now, you can appeal to the school, and there are some of the most prestigious schools in the country that will adjust your EFC based on paying tuition at a high school, but most will not. The other one that we typically do not consider a special circumstance is voluntary retirement. So if you come and say, well, Sam, that was our income last year, but then I retired this year and now my income's lower. Well, we'll catch it next year when we use next year's tax return. A voluntary retirement reduction of income, schools will wait and let the process catch up with itself when that tax year becomes the following year. Okay, so this is another important point, I think. We are required under federal law to count these 5 components in our cost of attendance. We must include, in calculating your eligibility for aid, not just tuition and fees and room and board, board's a meal plan, by the way, but book supplies, transportation, and miscellaneous and personal. And we have to give you a room and board allowance no matter where you live. There's an allowance for on-campus housing, off-campus apartment, or commuting from home with your parents. They're different, but we have to give an allowance, okay? So this happened to me often when I worked at Nazareth, because families would visit Fisher and Naz, because they're close. And families would come over to Naz after Fisher and say, you know, they'd see our cost of attendance like we published it and say, oh my gosh, you cost $15,000 more than Fisher. We were about $200 difference then in our price. But what you don't want to do is say how much is your tuition. Because you will be paying the whole cost of attendance, including room and board. So if you went to Fisher and said, what's your tuition? You'd get an answer, and then you'd be comparing apples and oranges if you were comparing that to our full cost of attendance. So don't forget that you will have room and board costs. Now, if they live on campus, the school's going to bill you for tuition, fees, room and board, and the aid's all going to apply to that bill. But you still need spending money for book supplies, transportation, and pizza, and sometimes laundry. Although books are cheaper now than when I was in college in the 80s, my children's books were cheaper than what I paid. And many of the schools, you don't have to put quarters in the washer and dryer anymore.
So when you're looking at a school's profile, so let's take U of R, it's 80,000. Are all of those inclusive? All of those very?
Yeah, when I say 80,000, I mean all of those
So
things.
that's room and board, tuition, plus all the extraneous.
Yep. Yep, everything.
But not everybody does that.
Well, we're required by law to do that. And we award our financial aid on that, but what I don't want you to do is visit a college and say, what's your tuition?
Right.
How much is your tuition?
Yeah.
What you want to know is the whole cost of it.
So as cost of attendance, and they have to
They have to.
incorporate all that into it.
Yep, and they technically have to disclose it to you in the award letter line by line. So let's talk for a minute now about the family contribution, and this is the actual measure of the student and family's ability to pay. It's broken down into 2 sections. We're going to talk about them both. We have a contribution from the student and a contribution from the parent. We're going to talk about parents' income first. This is the worst. I'm going to tell you first what's going to happen. You're all going to get frustrated, and you're going to shoot the messenger, and in about 5 minutes you're going to be looking at me with all these angry eyes. Happens every time. This is the hard part. Let's just get through it. It hits parents' income the hardest, I agree. There's not much you can do about that because it's straight from your tax return. So, first we determine the parent's income, and this is total income for the year that is being used on the FAFSA. So for all of you, it's your 2021 taxes applying for 2023. Total income, taxable and untaxed income. So if you have untaxed income like you're receiving child support, or you had a tax-deferred contribution to your retirement account that you didn't have to pay taxes on, but it was income from your employer. It's on your W-2, you can see it there. Those are the two most common types of untaxed income. Well, all income is included. And then you get some exclusions. Now, if you pay out child support in the household to another household, that does get deducted. And then you get to deduct your taxes, federal, state, local, and FICA. And then you get an income protection allowance for basic living expenses like food and shelter. So that gets deducted and the feds say, hey, based on your family size, here's the standard cost of living that we will deduct from your income before we do the analysis. Now I gotta find my page because I'm gonna look that up for you. For a family of 4 with 1 in college this year, that is just about $30,000. $30,000 for a family of 4 is the income protection allowance. So that's the Department of Ed saying, family of 4 can live on $30,000 and cover all basic needs. I don't see, I didn't anticipate all the noise, just the angry faces.
I just want to understand that. You can't make more?
No, it's just giving you an allowance for living. So they're using a standard. You can make more than that or less than that. You can spend more than that on living or less than that on living, but that's the allowance that they give you for basic food and shelter. Now that goes up if your family's bigger than 4, down if your family's smaller than 4. It actually goes down if your kids are away in college, but that's okay because it does get cheaper if they're both gone and not eating at home all the time. And then there's an employment allowance. Now, the employment allowance is 35% of the lesser of the earned income, or $4,000, whichever is less. Now, this is only applicable if every parent who lives in the house works outside of the house. So if you have 1 parent household and that parent's working, employment allowance. 35% of that income or $4,000, whichever is less. 2 parents in the house, both have to be working, and then you get that allowance. If 1 parent works and 1 parent stays home, no allowance. Now this is basically the Fed saying, look, it's expensive to work outside the house, right? Gas, lunch, clothes. I just had this thought through my head, although all my workout clothes that I've been working in during the pandemic are not necessarily cheaper than my work clothes, but sorry, I got distracted. Okay, and all of that gets deducted, and what's left is your available income. And then the formula takes a portion of that available income and says this is what you can pay for college. Okay? So there's more to the formula than this, but here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to just give you a simple rule of thumb on parents' income. Forget all this, blah, blah, blah. Here's the rule of thumb. If your income is total income, taxable and non-taxable, is $30,000 or less, your contribution from income is going to be 0, or pretty close to it. Okay? $30,000 to about $80,000. You're probably going to have a parent contribution that is about 10% of your income. So if you make $40,000, it's going to be about $4,000. $50,000, $5,000. It goes like that from up to around 80. Once you get up 90, 100, 120, it goes like this. So that a family of 4 at about $100,000 of total gross income, you're probably looking at a contribution of about $18,000 from income. And it goes up from there. $150,000 of income, you're probably looking at a contribution of $25,000 to $28,000. No, probably higher than that, probably closer to $30,000. Now, if you're applying to a private institution that costs $80,000 a year, you're still going to qualify for a significant amount of financial aid to John's point about, at least in year one, file the forms until you know if you are going to qualify or not. Because it also depends where you go to school. At $150,000 of income, you're probably not going to qualify for aid at a SUNY school. But you're going to qualify for aid at a private institution like you are. A lot of aid at a private institution like you are. Boy, you got awful quiet. I've done this a few times, right? So then we're going to talk about assets, parent assets. Parent assets are the most protected of the 4 parts of the formula. What are they anyway? Well, assets are cash, savings, checking accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Anything that is not in a retirement account. So you can have $1 million in your 401k and it would not be reported on the FAFSA or the profile, and not included in the analysis. The profile might ask you, but we don't use it in the analysis. It's informational only.
So it's income only.
Sorry?
It's income only.
Right, so on the retirement, if you're drawing it on the income side, you report that on the income section. But the asset itself is entirely protected and not reported. 401k, 403b, pension wouldn't be reported as an asset. You would just report the income that you draw in that year if you're drawing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So right off the bat, parents, your retirement assets are totally protected. The FAFSA also does not include your primary home or residence, the equity in your primary home. Now, for most families, the majority of your assets are in your primary home and your retirement account, and they're both not reported on the FAFSA form. They're completely protected. You would only then report other real estate investments that are not your primary residence and not your retirement account. So if you own other property, you would report, that other real estate value and any debt, and that would be included, but not your primary residence. So if a family has a house on the lake and you share it with a sibling, then you have 50% ownership of that house on the lake, then you're reporting 50% value in debt of that real estate. Right now, if you own a farm, and you live on a farm, you don't report the farm. That's kind of big because farms have assets in land and equipment that are valuable. But if you live on the farm, then that's also excluded from this analysis. If the farm is a different address or around the corner, down the street, you have to report it.
Good question.
Yes?
We report only the equity in the house, not the, so the value of the house minus the mortgage. So let's say if you bought a house 2 days ago, and you put no down payment, or whatever the down payment you put in, it's just that amount that you need to report.
You're right. I think it actually asks you what is the value, what is the debt, then the formula only assesses the equity. So if you have a house that's worth $100,000, but you have a mortgage of $90,000, then the equity or the value that's being counted for this is only that $10,000, not the 100. Yes.
You said worth $100,000, for example. Do you have to report estimated fair market value of the second property or what you paid for it originally?
You have to report fair market value of the real estate. Yep. And usually I say, it's not the tax assessment because they're not usually at full value, but you would report, ask yourself, what I usually say is if you were going to sell it today, what would you take? What would be the fair market value? That's what gets reported.
So primary residence is a pass-through?
Yeah, not even counted. You don't report the primary residence on the FAFSA. Now, the primary residence is counted on the profile form as an asset. So that's the second big difference between the FAFSA and the profile. Profile collects non-custodial parent information, and it also collects the equity in your primary residence. Not in your real estate assets, but in your primary residence.
So any additional property is reportable?
Mm-hmm. On the profile, but not for the federal side. If you own a business that employs less than 100 Employees, you don't report it on the FAFSA. You do report it on the profile, but you don't report it on the FAFSA. So you only report the value of your business if you own one, if you employ more than 100 people. So that's pretty well protected too, especially for small business owners. And then you get an education savings and asset protection allowance, and as you get older, as parents get older, that allowance gets bigger. As you're getting closer to your own retirement, it's protecting your assets for your retirement. Not that it's hugely big, but it gets bigger as parents get older. And after that is deducted, the remainder of the assets are assessed at a rate of 12%. Now I'm going to step back from this again and give you just a general rule of thumb on parental assets. Generally speaking, the net worth of your assets results in a contribution of about 4 to 6%. Not 46, 4 to 6%. So that means if you had $100,000 in assets, your contribution would be $4,000 to $6,000. Where we just said if you had $100,000 of income, your contribution would be around $18,000. So it treats assets very differently. What happens often for families is that if you have saved or you have equity to draw from, it relieves the pressure on the income side. And families can turn to those assets instead of turning to their income as a way to actually pay the bill. Any questions on assets? Here's a question I usually get now. What about my 529? It's got a 529. 529s are great. Why are they great? Because for FAFSA, they're parental assets. But for income tax, you also don't have to pay. If you have a New York State 529, you're not paying New York State taxes on up to, I think it's $10,000 that you put in a tax year. And then when you draw it out and use it for college, you don't pay federal or state taxes on the gains. There's no other investment that is a win-win between the IRS and the Department of Ed. If you're, for example, well, we'll talk about student assets in a minute, but usually if you are not paying taxes on it, then it gets hard in the FAFSA side. But for 529s, it's a win-win. You're relieved from much of the taxes, but you're also having it in the formula as a parent asset where it's pretty much protected. Yes?
I have a question in regards to budgeting it when the schools do it. So for example, if you pay in year one, when your child goes, you access that 529. Will they budget that same amount for years 2 to 4?
Some of the schools that use the profile will budget it 25% a year. And if you spend it at a different rate, they won't change their analysis. But most schools will just use the value that you have left on the day that you file. So again, say, just to make the math easy, because now I'm calculator dependent, say you had $100,000, right, in 529. And it would be assessed, you might go, oh, well, that would be $25,000 a year for 4 years. But say in the first year you needed $50,000 to pay the bill, and you took it all out of the 529, now you only have $50,000 left.
Right.
The next year when you file the forms, you would report the value at 50, and the renewal process would start all over again. Now you only have 50,000 instead of 100. But there are some schools that will do what you said and say, no, 25% a year no matter how you spend it.
So my second question is then, in regards to that, let's say you did not spend it in the first year. So, but then you'd only use it in your 4th year. So they wouldn't budget it, or would they? So let's say you have $100,000 in your 529.
And you still have $100,000 the next year?
Yes, and you don't use it at all. Would they budget it?
Probably not, they just reassess it again. Yeah. So use a little, I guess, is the lesson of that question is
So the
like,
ones that do the 25%.
Yeah, to those types of schools. I mean, I didn't spend it evenly. I knew I needed it in the 4 years that my 2 kids were overlapping their 6-year programs, where I was paying 2 college bills. I didn't need it in the first 2 years of my son and the last 2 years of my daughter. I needed it in the middle. So, you know, I did it my budget way. where I knew how it would impact my income with the other things, because, and that's an example of turning to savings because I couldn't have done it all out of my income in those overlapping years.
Thank you.
Okay, one last thing about the parent contribution, because this is the key to what's happening now, and they're not triplets, are they? Are they triplets? Twins and plus one?
Yeah, 303.
Gosh, so now, because now any other twins or triplets, I usually ask this, I'm like, now's when it's good, like, at 3 it wasn't so great. But for the parent side of this formula, the contributions from income and assets get put together, and then right now, it splits that contribution in half if there's 2 kids in college, and in thirds if there's 3 kids in college. Which makes a big difference if you go back to that graph of need varies based on cost, because it would cut your parent contribution portion in half or thirds in your case. So that's a big adjustment. Okay, any questions on the parent side before we talk about students? Yes?
You went through a number of rules of thumb, and that at different income levels, the curve gets higher. What's the rule of thumb? At what level do they assume that every dollar is available for tuition?
You know, there's not a cutoff. If there was, I would just give it to you, and you could say either I'll have to file or there's not a cutoff, and here's why. Assets do matter. So we do see low-income families with high assets and investments not qualify, even though the income is lower. We see, high-income families who don't have a lot of savings get cut out early because there's, just on the income contribution. I'm going to talk at the end about the net price calculator. My advice is, in year 1, just do the forms. If you don't qualify, then you don't have to do the renewal forms in year 2. And at schools that offer merit scholarships that are not based on need, usually they will say, you don't have to file the forms to renew the merit scholarship. So just do it year 1 to get your baseline and know where you're at. Also do it in years where enrollment of siblings changes, because other than your income, the biggest impact right now on eligibility is how many kids are in college at the same time.
Don't you need to do it so the kid can get the loan now?
You have to do the FAFSA if you want them to take the loan, even if it's the unsubsidized loan. Yes, you have to. Yes.
On the eligibility of the 2 in college, does it matter how much one is paying? Like if one's at MCC and one's at a full 4 year, does that matter? Or does it just matter if students are in college?
That's a great question. On the FAFSA form, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're at U of R and MCC, it splits it in half. On the profile form, it matters. The profile form says, where are they in college? And you would say, 2-year public, community college, 4-year private, even the privates break out, which basically gives you tiers in the cost differential between like a regional like NAS and Fisher and a national like Cornell and U of R. So the profile matters, and the schools that determine need with a profile don't split it 50-50, it splits a little differently based on how much you're paying for the other child. Yes?
So with a merit scholarships, that's all our sons are applying for. You would not need to fill out the FAFSA? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
typically, because merit scholarships are not based on need.
Okay.
They're based on talent or academic achievement. So most schools do not require that you file upfront or a renewal if the only thing you're looking for is merit. There are some schools, I don't know why honestly, but they do make you do a FAFSA form for renewal of merit. I don't know why, because it's not based on need. But so just double check at your son's school, because you don't want to not do something you have to do. But 99% of the time, you don't file FAFSA or profile for merit only.
I actually have another question in regards to 529s. What about grandparents?
Oh yeah, grandparent 529s are even better, because they're not anywhere reported. See, the thing about 529s is it's not really a student asset. It would be like, I own the asset in custody for like my son and daughter. So, and you can move that 529 through bloodlines, right? So if my son didn't use all of his, I could have moved it to my daughter. If she didn't use it, I could hold it for a grandchild, or, it's almost like, I don't know, a chess match. You can get it to a niece. I mean, you have to follow bloodlines, but that's why philosophically, it's not a student asset, it's a parental asset. You're the owner and you can move it around. Versus, we're going to talk about students' assets in a minute. You know, uniform gift to minors are student assets. They own it. So I used to say when my kids were little, you know, I got one. If she finds out she's got an UGMA account, you know, she might buy a VW bus and call me from California. Like, hey, Mom, what's up? You know, but because at 18 it becomes hers. But the 529s always stay with the owner. Grandparents are the owner, then you don't report them anywhere on these forms.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, student income. Basically, student income is defined the same way, all taxable and untaxed income. A lot of students, especially high school seniors, aren't yet filing taxes because they don't make a lot of money. But even if you're working at, I don't know what, I raised my kids in Wayne County. You know, even if you're working at Spanky Oliver's ice cream stand and not filing an income tax return, but you made $1,800, you're supposed to report the $1,800 of untaxed income, or babysitting, or wherever you make money. But with the exclusions that you get, most students don't earn in excess of the amount that would get assessed for a contribution. Students get exclusions for federal work study and co-op wages. Now that's not applicable in their high school year, but once they get to college, when you're working a federal work study job or a co-op job, that is taxable income with the IRS, and you will get a W-2. And if you have to file a tax return, you have to include that income and pay taxes on it. But then when you renew the financial aid, you don't get penalized for those earnings counting against your financial aid eligibility. So if I made $6,000 as a student and I made $4,000 at Spanky Oliver's and $2,000 in a work study job, my tax return would be filed at $6,000, but my FAFSA would only assess the $4,000 I made at the ice cream shop. They also get their deductions for federal, state, and FICA, and then students have an income protection allowance, which is currently $6,840. What does that mean? They have to make more than $6,840 to have any contribution from income. For the students in the room, I did not say that you don't have to work. But that really, what this is doing is protecting your income from being assessed towards college. Anything that you earn over those allowances, though, is assessed at 50%. So the Department of Ed is saying, hey, students, your priority is college. Parents have other priorities. They want to retire, they have household bills, they have other things to worry about, but you should only be worrying about your college. So if the income is higher than around $7,000, it's assessed pretty high at 50%. But most college freshmen are not in that bracket.
Excuse me.
Students, yes.
Does that include custodial savings accounts as well?
So this was income side. So it wouldn't. So the savings accounts are an asset.
Okay.
So that wouldn't count on the income side. Only any wages they earn or income they earn from a job.
Okay.
But now we're going to talk about assets. Student assets are basically the same as parents. Cash savings and checking accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Most students don't own the businesses and farms, but if they did, it's the same rule. If you live on the farm, then you exclude it. If your business has less than 100 employees, you exclude it. Retirement accounts are excluded. So you could start a Roth IRA for your child, and because it's a retirement account, it would not be reported as an asset. But if you have a trust fund, an UGMA account, just any investments, regular investments, in the student's name, they would be reported here as a student asset. Yes?
And the UGMA, is that reported on the FAFSA or on the profile?
Both. UGMAs.
So the IRS figures it out through your tax return, or how do they?
No, now we're in the asset section.
Uh-huh.
Not connected to the tax return anymore.
Okay, you just have to fill it in.
You just have to say what your value is. Or even if it's a savings bond, you have to figure out. So these are just assets like UGMA accounts, savings bonds, the checking account, savings account.
So I have a question. So like for instance, if they work and they saved all their money, that's almost to their detriment.
Kind of is, right? Because
Get rid of it.
in this tax year, if I made $2,000, well, if I made $2,000 in this tax year based on what we just said about student income as a student, it wouldn't create a contribution because it's under that 6,800 protection. But if I saved that same 2,000, now it gets assessed at a straight 20%. Student assets are 20%, period. So if they have $100,000 in an UGMA or a trust fund or whatever, 20,000 is going to be the contribution if it's in their name. So there's a big difference on who owns the asset, on the impact on the formula. And this is where, like, I had 529s, I also had UGMAs. UGMAs were great when my kids were under 14 because of the tax benefits there. But UGMAs are not great now when you're filing FAFSA because they go in the student assets and are assessed at a much higher rate.
So if you move to that over to something.
You could. So here's the thing. So my disclaimer too is I am not a financial planner. So when you go to your financial planner, don't say Sam said, because I've done financial aid for a long time, but I'm not a financial planner. I'll tell you how financial aid works, and then you can talk to your financial planner. But assets are reported on the day you file the FAFSA. And you cannot update them until the next year when you refile the FAFSA. There's no correcting them. So if you file Saturday, October 1st, when the form becomes available, you're reporting the income from 2021 and the asset value on Saturday. If the stock market plunges next Thursday, you don't get to go back and update your assets. It's a snapshot picture on that day. You don't get to update them until the next year when you refile the tax returns. That's how assets work. Yes?
So if the student works the summer and makes the 7,000 and that's exempt and fills out the FAFSA on October 1st, they have to pay 20% of the 7,000, right?
So if the student works in the summer a job and it's income, so first of all, income is the 2 years back tax return. So when you're filing on the income side, it's like, right now we're saying, what did the student earn in a job in 2021 when filing for 2023? So that income was made 2 years ago. And that's the income section of the FAFSA. And they can link out to the IRS data retrieval tool too if they file a tax return. But then you step over to the asset section and it says, for the student, how much money is in my checking account, savings account, right? Totally different question. If in that year that I made 7,000 in my summer job, I put 6,000 in the bank, the 6,000 is now an asset right now. And it's income in the year that it was earned at the job.
If you put it in like a Roth IRA or something, IRA, they can't count.
But if you put it in a Roth IRA, then it's not reportable because it's a retirement account. That's one way. And then, you know, what you could do, so if right now you've got a lot of money in an UGMA, you could think about moving as much as you can, because there are limitations, which I forget off the top of my head, over to a 529 before you actually file the forms. So don't file on Saturday. Meet with your financial planner, switch your UGMAs to a 529, get some tax deductions on that, and then change, because parent assets are assessed at 4 to 6%. Students are assessed at 20, so it matters. So parent income, what's the lesson we learned today? Parent income and student assets are the two components that are hit the hardest in the formula. And then basically, they all get added together to make the family contribution. Okay, parent income, parent assets, student income, student assets, all gets added together. So even if you have twins, your parent contribution will be the same, but the students might have different income and assets, creating a different contribution, even though they're siblings and the parent income's the same. Now, how you actually pay is up to you. You have some choices. You might not pay exactly what your family contribution is that's calculated on the form, but you have a choice. You can use savings, you can use current income, or you can borrow, or some combination of those three. All of the schools have payment plans. I do have a couple of examples we'll go through real quick. Usually I do these on Monday night, and then I'm always standing between you and Monday night football, so I don't know what's on tonight, but, so these are real life examples. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. But again, now you see these numbers at work, these general rules of thumb. So Dirty Harry comes from a family of 5 with 2 in college. Total parent income is $81,892, and parent assets are $87,880 because that doesn't include retirement accounts or the house. Mom and dad both work. They have wages, so they get that employment allowance. Mom's wage is $55.42, dad's is $71,780. And stop there for a minute, let's look at the parent contribution. Now, what did we say generally for a family whose income was about $80,000? 10% of income, right? At that range, roughly, 10% of income. That would be about $8,200 for a parent contribution. Now, this is a family of 5, and there's 2 in college, so that contribution gets cut in half. So, in this case for Dirty Harry, the parent contribution is $45.88, and it's all coming from income because those assets are low enough to be completely protected by the allowance. The student's wages are $38.30. That is under that protection allowance of 68 something. And their savings account was $7,800. So the student contribution of $1,560 is the straight 20% of their savings account. You add those 2 together, and this family contribution is $6,148. And it's $6,148 whether they apply to MCC or U of R. Snow White is a family of 4 with 1 in college. This income is $120,395. Net worth is $5,300. Both parents are working. This family of 4 has a contribution, 1 in college, of $25,285 from the parents, and that is all coming from income because the assets are low enough to be protected in this example. The student's income is $500, so again, below that threshold, but the $1,000 in their savings account equates to a $200 student contribution, 20% of the $1,000. So the total family contribution in this case is $25,485, primarily, almost completely driven by the $120,000 of income for this family of 4. And then we have Annie Apple.
Income, right? That's a gross income.
Gross, yep.
What's the net worth in this?
Which one? Are you backing me up to?
Snow White.
Snow White. So the net worth was 50, whoops, something else back in here.
But that's not on the other one, the prior. I'm just wondering what,
The prior example? Dirty Harry?
Yeah.
I called it parent assets here on Dirty Harry,
oh, okay.
8780, and here I called it net worth.
Gotcha.
Same thing, the net worth of the assets. That's a good catch. No one's ever caught that. Yes.
So when you say total income, is that
Yeah.
the same as your available income on the?
No.
Okay,
Total income starts at the top, because that's what you report.
right.
Gross and unadded with untaxed if there is any. So Annie Apple, it has 2 in the family, 1 in college. It's a single parent household with $25,029 of income that year and no assets, so no net worth. Mom's wages are $14,000 and the rest of that income is untaxed child support. Mom has a contribution of 0 in this case, at that income level. Students' wages are completely protected here again, and there's a 20% contribution from the $300 in the student savings account. A technical note here, there's an automatic 0 at a certain threshold of income and assets, and in fact, Annie Apple probably would just be the automatic 0 EFC and not even have the 60, but. Okay, so hopefully tonight we debunked some of these myths and misconceptions about financial aid. Yes?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm just troubled by this 20% of student assets. Is there any reason why it wouldn't be inappropriate, you know, if you're going to file this in October, have the student exhaust their contribution towards tuition down to 0 in September? It's all on a cash basis, so like, you know, it's not fraudulent or anything. It's just kind of like, all right, you know, you pick up the first 10 grand out of your savings, deplete it, When you file the FAFSA, it's gone, and then you have to use parental assets to support them. Is there any reason you couldn't do that?
Not at all. But in the example you gave, okay, you must be talking about like paying for high school tuition because college tuition would not be due before the deadline to file the forms.
But incoming.
In the next years, yes, they can spend down their assets. Or, you know, what I've had some families say is, well, Johnny needs a car. Should I just buy a car? Well, if you take the money out of savings and buy a car, now you don't report the car. Cars aren't assets that are reported. And now the money's not in the savings anymore. Or a laptop is another one, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And it's whatever day you file.
But it's whatever day you file. So if you're going to buy a car on Saturday, then don't do the fast until Sunday. Saving for college won't hurt you. Saving for anything won't hurt you. If I can go pay cash for a car, then I'm better off in the long run, right? And maybe even save some money because I'm not financing it. So saving doesn't hurt you. Saving gives you an option to lean on when this formula assesses your income so harshly. The formula does not expect you to drain your assets, so you hear families say, oh, they're making me mortgage my house. They're not even looking at your house in most cases. The profile counts the equity in the house, but even then, the assets are such a small part of the analysis that you're not being asked to drain your savings account or mortgage any property. You do not have to pay twice as much with 2 in school, although typically it's reasonable to expect that you will pay a little bit more with 2 in school, but usually not twice because the formula offsets. Here's the other question. Who has them 4 years apart? Yeah, that's where it's rough, right? Because now you get none of this savings of overlapping them in college. Now's when you wish you had twins. And outside scholarships, we didn't really talk about that. Outside scholarships is something I want you to talk about with your financial aid office and see how it would impact your financial aid award. Some schools reduce their grant money dollar for dollar when you win an outside scholarship. So you'll send them a notice, oh, at graduation, we got a $1,000 scholarship in the high school. They'll turn around and reduce theirs. We do not do that at Rochester. Your son worked hard to earn that scholarship, and you should use it to either reduce your contribution or the student loan. But we have to, by law, federal law, add that scholarship into the financial aid award, and you have to tell us. And frankly, most of those checks nowadays come to the school anyway, so I'm going to find out eventually when the check comes toward the bill, and then I'm going to have to include it. So you might as well tell me in June so we can get it all set up to begin with. What I will say though, and because you work in a community where there's a lot of colleges, the thing that's different is tuition benefits. Tuition benefits will typically cut need-based grant dollar for dollar. Now, if you work at U of R and you're thinking about coming to U of R, we usually know that through the admissions process, and we'll prepare the financial aid award with the tuition benefit and not the grant. But just be aware that if you work at the Cornell station in Geneva and get the Cornell benefit, Cornell has a pretty significant benefit that transfers out. U of R's doesn't. If you're bringing in a benefit from another college or university, expect that will reduce grant money, and you should talk to your financial aid office upfront about that so you know exactly how it's going to impact the financial aid, as well as any outside scholarships. If you did plan and save, then you have more options open, and maybe you won't have to borrow as much. Spreading out the cost of college will lessen the impact on your lifestyle during the years that you pay for college. Let me tell you, I feel rich now. I just bought a new car this weekend, and I built a new house 2 years ago because I was paying college for like 10 years, something like that, between the two of them. There are some other financing options available to help you cover your family contribution. The federal government has a parent loan option that parents can take out. It's an easy approval, simple credit check, and it works a little like a home equity line. You can draw more every year, and your payment will adjust accordingly. The downside to the federal program is the interest rates are high. The 7.54 is the rate this year. You can probably get a personal loan or home equity line at a lower interest rate, but the education loan programs have an in-school deferment that those personal loans don't have. So you can defer repayment of the federal parent loan while the student's in college. All of the colleges now have monthly payment plans. You can usually spread the balance out over 10 to 12 months, the balance for the year. Or if you want a loan, but you want it to be in the student's name and not your name, then you can take a private or alternative loan. Now note here though that students, because they haven't yet established credit, they'll need a cosigner with good credit to get approved. And so it's still on your credit report, just like the parent loan, only now these private loans have monthly variable interest rates. Okay, the most important thing today is meet the deadline, meet the deadline, meet the deadline. If you have special circumstances, fill out your forms and then reach out directly to the financial aid office to see what, if anything, they can do based on your special circumstance. Use your 2021 income. I should keep copies of everything off of here now. There's no paper anymore, so there's nothing really to keep a copy of. All these paper faxes used to get lost in Fafsa heaven. We never knew where they went, and everyone had to start over. But I don't know. Yes.
So question, for our daughter, the only option that we had was a Parent Plus loan. She could take a loan on herself. It was a subsidized
Yep.
5,500 or 6,500, but everything else we had to take on the parent's name, not on her name with a co-signer. There was no, that option was available. So do you know why? The Department of Education. And then I called them on the phone, and they said that that's the only, absolutely the only option.
You called the school or the Department of
I called
Education?
the Department of Education.
Yeah. So we do have to make sure that you exhaust the federal student loan program before you turn to a private loan. I mean, we have to make sure that you know that, because the federal student loan program, the subsidized and unsubsidized, is typically a better loan for the student than a private loan. But private loans have always been available. Back when I used to work at Hobart William Smith, they were running ads on MTV, and students were applying that way without even going through the school. They've always been available, but the Department of Ed wouldn't tell you that, but the school should have told you about those other private loan options.
Well, I'm not talking about private loans. I'm talking about why the student is not allowed to apply by himself for a loan for the Department of Education of a higher value. Other than 5,500.
That's right. I'm with you now. Because the Congress has set those maximum loan amounts at that level. The most that a student can borrow as a first-year student is $5,500 in a combination of subsidized and unsubsidized. That goes up to $6,500 for the second year of school and $7,500 in each of the junior and senior years. And that is the max that the federal government will lend to a student. If you need more than that, then it's a parent loan or a private loan. Yes.
Okay, I have two questions. So how long are they considered your child?
Yeah.
Like that one took a gap year and started, what if another one? I mean, how many years is it, like at 25? And then what if they say, okay, it's cheaper if I, what do they call it, emancipate on their own?
There's no emancipation in the state of New York.
Okay.
Can't do it.
They can't go say, I don't want to be part of this family and go live.
Not in the state of New York. It won't work for financial aid.
Okay.
Financial aid, for a student to file as an independent without their parents, they have to be 24, married, orphan, ward of the court before the age of 14, a veteran, have legal dependents of their own, so children of their own, for which they support more than 50%. Because sometimes they do have a child, but they're not providing the financial support for that child. Homeless, as certified by the homeless youth liaison at the school or shelter. Graduate, or a graduate student. Because sometimes you graduate undergrad and go straight into grad school before you're 24. That's it. The only other way for a student to be considered independent is if the parent doesn't, or if the parent, is if the financial aid office doesn't override And for the financial aid office to make a student independent, there would have to be documented verbal and or physical abuse by the parents. Otherwise, they have to file on their parents. I don't care if they live on their own, pay their own rent before they're 24 years old. I don't care if you claim them. You might as well claim them on your tax return because you're going to have to file for them anyway on the FAFSA. So don't give up your deduction until you absolutely have to, which is...
Is there an age, as you said,
24.
So those are all independent. So you don't have to be a 24-year-old married orphan to get it.
What's that?
They're all independent.
You don't have to meet them all. You only have to meet one. Now, the other thing I quickly want to mention is that we are also required, and have been since 2008, to put a net price calculator on our website. You should be able to use those calculators to get an idea of your EFC and your cost at that school. Some schools bury their calculators so deep that you cannot find it. You have to put it in the search button. It should come up because they're required by law and we get audited every year. Some schools put it front and center because they're very proud of theirs, their calculators and the results that you will get. We do that at U of R. Feel free to use ours. It'll give you your EFC. I mean, it won't estimate your aid package unless you're going to a similar price school. We have two on our website. We have one called My Intuition that's like a quick and dirty, 5 questions, and it'll say, you know, your cost is roughly $8,000 to $12,000 a year. And then we have a very thorough net price calculator. It's almost like filing a FAFSA, but it will give you your family contribution and your need-based financial aid award. So check the website. If your son is thinking about early decision, please do a calculator first. Early decision has a binding agreement. You are signing and saying, I'm coming here if you admit me. And the financial aid packages come out right after those acceptances and usually before the Christmas holiday. But it's a binding agreement, and so you should know what your cost is and have an idea of what your financial aid is going to be. And if you don't know, then maybe don't go early decision. Wait and go regular. Yes.
Can I ask your opinion of schools that say they're need blind? Are they truly need blind?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lawsuit brewing right now with an accusation that some of the schools who say they're need blind really aren't, particularly in relation to legacy, what's called legacy admission. So preferential treatment if your parents or grandparents went there, kind of thing. But I will say, in my experience, most of the schools who say they're need blind really are. But, you know, like at Rochester, for example, we're very generous in our financial aid and we're committed to meeting full need. And we have a merit scholarship program. But to afford to be able to do that, we're not need blind. We're need aware. So typically schools, you know, will be very honest about whether they're need blind or whether they're need aware. You know, schools that can't meet your need anyway, of course they're need blind. They're not going to spend any more money or any less money because they just won't meet your need. And so need isn't a factor in how much money they spend.
I was thinking more like for acceptance. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's true for acceptance. And truly I think, you know, there isn't a school that I know of anymore, and haven't for a long, long time, that would give you a disadvantage in financial aid for early decision. That used to be a myth. It was a myth, though, before I even started working in financial aid 30 years ago. It really doesn't happen anymore. You will get the same financial aid. But, you know, and so it works for some and not others. Just know what you're getting into and make sure that you can afford it if your child gets into that early decision program. I mean, my son ended up going early decision, and we didn't think we were going to do that, and we did all these visits, and then the last visit, he loved it, knew what he wanted, and went early decision. He was a basketball player. He enjoyed the rest of his senior year because he was done, he knew where he was going, and all his friends were still applying to colleges and figuring it out, you know, and he could just focus on his senior project and basketball. And So it worked for him. My daughter, I think April 30th, I was like, we are paying a deposit tonight. You are my worst nightmare in my job, that person who waits until May 1st. I'm like, you're making me crazy. Where are you going to college, you know? So I had one at both ends, but.
So unless the son or daughter is intent on going to a particular school, are you doing yourself a disservice by early decision? By signing, is there a letter of intent?
There is, and actually the school counselor signs too and says, I won't send any recommendations, transcripts, or anything to any other school as soon as they're admitted to the school. So everybody's like got this code of conduct that says, I want to come to you and only you. If you admit me, I'll pull all my other applications and stop applying.
But can that be a disservice doing that? And would that disallow like a lot of this stuff and the other merit and need-based to rinse through all the other schools?
Well, likely no, because first of all, like I said, we don't do anything different in financial aid. And the schools that use the profile and are high cost like Rochester, there's no negotiation. You're eligible for what you're eligible for, and that's what you get. The schools that don't meet your need are more likely to consider an appeal without a special circumstance just because they know they didn't meet your need, but that usually only garners you 1,000 or more, if anything. So I would say, you know, think about where your child really wants to go. It doesn't change the financial aid, but what it does do is, I think if you have a child who may not get in, who is reaching for a school that they really want to go to, but academically they might not get admitted, you have a much better chance of getting in going early. Because now you're competing against, you know, a much smaller pool than that big pool of regular decision applications. So advantage getting in early decision, but I see no disadvantage financially either way.
I think one of the drawbacks of applying early decision is that you're not going to have the opportunity to compare financial aid packages, right? So I mean, if you apply early decision and you know it's a binding commitment, that's the package that you get. You're not going to be able to compare that package to packages that other schools might offer.
But that's why you should do a calculator at that school and kind of know, like, what am I going to get? Does it work for me? And then if this is the best place for my child, if it all works out, great. If it doesn't, then that's fine. Don't do early. Just go regular.
But doing a calculator ahead of time is unbelievably important. Because you know the only way out of an early decision agreement is that the finances don't work.
Right.
But even saying that, there's still a built-in assumption that you've done some legwork ahead of time, either through a net price calculator or through an EFC estimator, where you get a pretty good sense as to what your eligibility is going to be like.
Yeah, so I will say to you too, like, you can be released from early decision, the binding contract, if it's not affordable to you. But at Rochester, we won't release for that reason because we meet need. So philosophically, we're saying you should know what your need is, and then you know what your package is going to be, you know what you're getting into, and ahead of time when you apply early. So we send a lot of letters saying, please use our calculator, please know what the cost will be because this is a binding agreement that you're signing. But like when I worked at Nazareth, they don't meet need. And so then when you get admitted and get the package, if it's not affordable, you could be released. Because there would have been no way for you to know ahead of time what the package would have been or how much of a gap they were going to give you. Yes?
So on this net price calculator, I haven't gone and researched this yet. Do you have to like set up an account, or is it just, you can just put it in, or do you have to like link yourself to all the data that you're putting in?
You don't have to link yourself to the data that you're putting in. For a lot of them, nobody's storing it, but the College Board also provides in that price calculator that many of the schools who use the profile also use. And in those cases, with your College Board login, in which the student already has from SATs and APs, you could save your data, and because it's like filling out the Fafsa, it takes a minute, right? It's a lot of data. You could save your data and then do every single College Board calculator at every school that uses it without re-entering your data. So then once it's in there once, you could do U of R, Cornell, Syracuse, You know, NAS even uses it, because I set it up when I was there. You know, you could do whatever other school without re-entering your data all over again.
I was more interested in the privacy of
Of the privacy of it.
things on the
Yeah,
internet.
and it doesn't come to the school that way, so we don't
The
see
school's
it.
not tracking you on that
Nope.
site. I wonder what the college board,
So the College Board isn't saving that data, sharing that data either. It's de-identified.
So you,
Yes,
so you
sorry.
can go onto the College Board calculator and they have all of the information for the school maybe that you want, or a bunch of schools.
Yeah,
They can access those
Yeah.
the schools.
there'll be a list of schools that use it, and you can enter your data once and then just run the analysis on
Each school. that
each
you
school
want.
without re-entering your
You don't
data.
have to go to each school's website.
You don't have to go to each school's website. Or like, if you started a school like U of R that uses College Board, you can save it through me and then go to Syracuse and use your login and run it without re-entering your data. Yes.
So the EFC that spits out, is it this, once you get that number, is that the same wherever you go?
Yep.
That number change?
Nope.
And is that like overall? Like, in other words, if you had put in, I have 4 kids that are going to go to college, and it gives you this EFC number, is that saying out of all 4 kids, here's this giant number, or number that?
So the family contribution is per student.
It's per student.
So if you have 2 kids in college at the same time, you're filing separate forms, and the calculation is per student. And the analysis does split it, the parent contribution in half if there's 2 in college, or in fourths if there's 4 kids in college. So if you had 4 kids in college, if your parent contribution was $10,000, each student would be $2,500.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. It wouldn't tell you your whole thing. What it gives you as the result is based on the FAFSA for that child, and then you would add it if you had another FAFSA for another child. And that's if you then get a financial aid award that meets your need, then you're going to pay about your family contribution. If the school doesn't meet your need, you could pay more. If a school gives you a big merit scholarship, you could pay less than your parent contribution if they get a scholarship that's not based on need. Let me come back. I think you've been waiting.
Can I go back to a question about the assets?
Yeah.
If you hold real estate assets, but they're not in your name personally, they're in the name of your company, and your company has less than 100 employees, do you have to
Right.
report that asset?
No, if it's a business asset in the company's name and the company has less than 100 employees, no, it's not reportable. Yes.
So when will you know, like, the merit scholarships come in at the same time as the other parts of it?
So typically what happens is when your child is admitted, the admissions office notifies, usually with admission, of what the merit scholarship will be. And then they tell the financial aid office, and we incorporate the merit as part of the total financial aid award. But we follow, so we can't send the financial aid offer until they're admitted. Some schools coordinate it and they all go out at once, the merit and the need base. But some schools, you hear from admissions and then a few days later you hear from financial aid.
And when you hear from financial aid, that's when you know about the merit.
You'll know about the merit usually when you hear from admission. And then financial aid will tell you if you get even more money over and above the merit based on need. The other thing I will say, I usually say this at the beginning, but I actually don't think I did. You have my contact information. I'm literally right down the street. I don't care if you're coming to Rochester. Stop over to my office. I'm in Wallace Hall. You know, we can look over stuff as you start to get it, or just send me an email and say, Sam, remember I was at the McQuaid Financial Aid Night? That's what I tell everyone. Just tell me where I met you. And, you know, and then if you have a question as you navigate this process, happy to help you. All financial aid administrators really are like that, so hopefully you find that kind of service from the school you're applying to. But feel free to reach out, you know, as you get through the points of this process if you have some questions, even if you're not looking at who are.
Thank you.
You have my email, and I'm quick on you. If I'm in the office, you'll usually hear back from me pretty quick. Any other questions? I wasn't trying to, like, I feel like I could stay here all night. You guys are the ones who probably had enough. Okay, well, good luck in this process. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and thank you for spending some time with me tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.